I stood right there in our living room with a painful surgical incision and two screaming newborn twins in my arms, watching my husband zip his luxury luggage. He casually stated that our 1-month-old sons were simply way too loud, and he needed to fly to Europe to find himself. When he finally returned a month later, expecting to find his submissive wife waiting, he found an empty house, frozen bank accounts, and a reality check that would leave him begging on the street. If you have given everything to someone who threw it away, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to hear how I turned betrayal into satisfying revenge. My name is Olivia, and I am 34 years old. The piercing, synchronized wails of Liam and Leo, my 1-month-old twin boys, echoed sharply off the high ceilings of our suburban bedroom. It was a sound that had consumed my entire world for 4 grueling weeks. I was functioning on zero sleep over the past 48 hours. My body was throbbing, radiating a deep burning ache from a complicated emergency cesarean section that had not yet properly healed. Every step I took felt like walking through thick mud. My hair was tied up in a tangled knot, my oversized shirt was stained with baby formula, and my eyes were stinging from sheer exhaustion. I swayed slightly on my feet, gently bouncing Liam against my chest while rocking Leo in his bassinet with my foot trying desperately to soothe them both. At the same time, Bradley, my 35-year-old husband, was not holding a baby. He was not warming up a bottle or offering to take a shift so I could finally close my eyes. Instead, he was standing at the foot of our bed, meticulously folding a brand new cashmere sweater and tucking it neatly into his expensive leather carry-on suitcase. He was freshly showered, smelling of high-end cologne, wearing a crisp button-down shirt and tailored trousers. The stark contrast between my agonizing reality and his pristine appearance was entirely sickening. I stared at him, hoping my sleep-deprived mind was just playing a cruel trick on me. "Bradley, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice hoarse and raspy. "The babies have colic. I need you to hold Leo while I give Liam his medicine." Bradley did not even look up from his packing. He carefully zipped the compartment of his suitcase, smoothed out the front pocket, and then finally turned to face me. His expression was completely blank, devoid of any empathy or paternal concern. "These babies are too noisy," he said, his tone as casual as if he were complaining about a neighbor dog. "I need space to find myself." The words hung in the air, battling against the relentless crying of our sons. I blinked, trying to process the sheer absurdity of what he had just said. "Find yourself," I repeated, feeling a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. "Bradley, we have 2 1-month-old infants. I am recovering from major surgery. You cannot leave right now." He let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, acting as if I were putting an unreasonable burden on his shoulders. "Olivia, you are being completely suffocating," he said, crossing his arms. "Ever since the twins arrived, this house has been a nightmare. It is constantly chaotic. You are always crying or complaining about being tired. You do not even look like yourself anymore. You walk around in sweatpants, looking miserable, and it is really bringing down my energy." I felt a sharp physical pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my surgical wound. "I am crying because I am in agony, and I am doing this completely alone," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. "You have not woken up for a single night feeding since we brought them home from the hospital." Bradley rolled his eyes, grabbing his passport and wallet from the nightstand. "I work a very demanding job, Olivia. I am a regional sales director. I cannot be expected to function at a high level if I am kept awake all night by screaming infants. You are on maternity leave. This is literally your job right now." He grabbed his suitcase handle and pulled it up with a sharp click. "Besides, I already booked the ticket. The guys and I have been planning this Europe trip for months. I really need this trip to decompress. A month in Italy and France will be exactly what I need to reset my mental health." "You will figure it out. You always do. A month. He was leaving me alone with 2 newborn babies and a healing surgical wound for an entire month to go drink wine in Europe with his friends. I stepped into his path, blocking the bedroom door. Liam was still crying against my shoulder, but I barely registered the sound anymore. "If you walk out that door right now, Bradley, do not bother coming back," I threatened, though my voice lacked the strength I desperately wanted it to have. He let out a short, mocking laugh, stepping around me with practiced ease. "Please, Olivia," he sneered, looking me up and down with utter disdain. "We both know you cannot survive without me. Who is going to pay the bills? You are a stay-at-home mom now with 2 kids. You need my income to keep this roof over your head. I will see you in 4 weeks. Try to get yourself together by the time I get back." Without another single word, he walked down the long hallway and out the front door. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind him, leaving me entirely alone in a silent, empty house. I collapsed against the wall and realized the man I married was truly gone forever. Before my mind could process that wooden door clicking shut, my phone buzzed against the floor. The harsh ringing sliced through the sounds of Liam and Leo crying. I scooped up the device, expecting a message from Bradley saying he was turning around. Instead, the screen flashed with the name Patricia, my mother-in-law. I swiped to accept the call, hoping Bradley had called his parents to talk sense into him. I was wrong. "Olivia, what is this nonsense I am hearing from my son?" Patricia snapped the moment the line connected. Her voice was laced with the same condescending tone she had used since we met. There was no greeting, no asking how her newborn grandsons were doing, and no concern for my recovery. It was an immediate, aggressive attack. "You are throwing a tantrum because Bradley is taking a well-deserved vacation. Have you lost your mind?" I shifted Liam to my other shoulder, wincing as my abdominal stitches pulled painfully. "Patricia, he just walked out on me," I said, my voice trembling. "He left me alone with 2 screaming infants. I am still bleeding from surgery and have not slept in 2 days. He packed a bag and left for Europe for an entire month. How is that a well-deserved vacation?" Patricia let out a loud, dramatic sigh. "Do not be selfish, Olivia," she scolded, her tone dripping with disdain. "Bradley works incredibly hard to provide for you and those boys. He is under a massive amount of pressure at his job and needs this European trip to reset. If you did not nag him so much about every little thing, he would not feel so suffocated in his own home." "Suffocated," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Patricia, I asked him to hold his own child so I could give the other one medicine. How is asking for basic parenting help considered nagging?" "You are a stay-at-home mother now," Patricia countered. "That is your job. Bradley is the provider. He pays the mortgage, buys the groceries, and keeps the lights on. You get to sit at home playing with babies while he faces the stress of the corporate world. The least you can do is manage the household without bothering him every time a child cries. You should be grateful you have a husband willing to support you so you do not have to work." The profound ignorance in her statement almost made me laugh. My mother-in-law firmly believed I was nothing but a dependent housewife living off her son and his mediocre middle management salary. She had absolutely no idea that the house I was supposedly sitting in all day was legally owned by my own private company. She had no idea that I paid the mortgage, that I funded our lifestyle, and that his paycheck barely covered his expensive golf habits. I had kept my business success completely separate and quiet to avoid bruising his fragile ego, a decision I was now deeply regretting. "He abandoned his family, Patricia," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "I do not care how stressful his job is. You do not walk out on 1-month-old twins because they are noisy." "He did not abandon you," she snapped back, fiercely defending her precious son. "He is taking space because you are making his life miserable. Richard and I completely support his decision. We helped him book the hotels. Men need their freedom, Olivia. You cannot chain a successful man to a nursery and expect him to stay happy. Use this month to get your body back in shape, clean that house, and learn how to be a supportive wife. Maybe if you put some makeup on and smiled more, he would actually want to come home to you." My father-in-law, Richard, yelled something in the background, and Patricia quickly relayed the message. Richard says you need to stop acting like a victim. Women have been raising babies alone for centuries without complaining. Stop bothering my son and let him enjoy his trip. If you ruin this for him, we will never forgive you. The line went dead. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, echoing the profound emptiness of my marriage. I slowly lowered the phone, staring blankly at the dark screen. The toxic dynamic of his family was suddenly crystal clear in my mind. They had raised a narcissist, a man who believed his comfort was the only thing that mattered, and they fully expected me to act as his obedient servant, bowing down to his financial supposed superiority while taking the brunt of his responsibilities. Liam had finally stopped crying, his tiny head resting heavily against my collarbone. Leo quieted down in his bassinet, exhausted from his own tears. The sudden silence was deafening, the sound of complete and utter isolation. For 5 long years, I had silently endured Patricia and her backhanded compliments, Richard and his condescending remarks, and Bradley and his constant need to be the center of the entire universe. I looked down at my 2 sleeping boys. They were entirely dependent on me. They needed a strong mother, not a disposable maid. A cold, calculating fury began to replace the crushing despair in my chest. I gently placed Liam down next to his brother, making sure they were both secure. Bradley thought I was a helpless dependent woman begging for his return. Patricia and Richard thought they could bully me, using their son and his average income as a weapon. They believed I was trapped, chained to this house by financial necessity. They were about to learn a very hard lesson. My tears dried up. I stood up straight, ignoring the burning pain in my abdomen. I was not going to be the victim any longer. I would gather every single piece of evidence I needed to expose them, and I would be the architect of their absolute destruction. I wiped my face and forced myself to breathe deeply. The adrenaline from Patricia's call ebbed away, leaving a sharp, throbbing ache in my lower abdomen. I needed to focus on the immediate reality. Liam and Leo were asleep, but would wake up hungry soon. The pediatrician had prescribed a highly specialized hypoallergenic formula for their severe colic, and our supply was running dangerously low. I grabbed my laptop and sat at the kitchen island, wincing as I lowered myself. I navigated to the medical supply website and added a bulk order of the specialized formula to my cart. It was expensive, but absolutely necessary for the boys. I entered the details for our primary joint debit card. I clicked submit and waited. Instead, a red error message flashed, stating the transaction had been declined. I frowned, staring at the screen in confusion. Perhaps I had mistyped a digit. I carefully re-entered the information before hitting submit again. The same glaring red error message appeared. Transaction declined by the issuing bank. Unease prickled at my neck. I opened a new tab and typed in the web address for our primary banking portal. Bradley and I used this joint account for all our shared household expenses. I transferred a set amount into it every month from my separate personal accounts to cover my half of the bills, while Bradley deposited his entire paycheck here to manage the mortgage and utilities. We also kept a robust emergency savings fund attached to this profile, specifically designed to cover 6 months of living expenses if anything catastrophic ever happened. I typed in my username and password and hit enter. The loading wheel spun for what felt like an eternity. When the dashboard finally populated on my screen, my heart completely stopped beating. The checking account balance, which should have held several $1,000s to cover the upcoming property tax and utility bills, showed a balance of exactly $14.32. I blinked hard, thinking there must be a glitch in the banking software. I refreshed the page, but the dismal number remained unchanged. Panic began to claw its way up my throat. I quickly clicked over to the Emergency Savings tab. The screen loaded instantly, and the number staring back at me felt like a physical blow to my healing stomach. $0. The emergency savings account was completely empty. My hands began to shake uncontrollably as I navigated to the recent transaction history. I needed to see where the money had gone. The ledger loaded, revealing a single massive transfer that had been initiated just 3 hours ago. A wire transfer for exactly $45,000 had been pushed from our savings account and funneled directly into an external offshore account that I did not recognize. The timestamp on the transfer aligned perfectly with the moment Bradley had been waiting in the airport departure lounge. He had sat there sipping a coffee and deliberately drained our entire financial safety net right before boarding his flight to Europe. He did not just walk out on his newborn sons and his recovering wife to find himself. He deliberately robbed us blind on his way out the door. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal washed over me, rendering me temporarily paralyzed. That $45,000 was supposed to be our absolute last resort. It was the money we had painstakingly saved for unexpected medical bills or a sudden job loss. He had taken every last cent of it to fund a month-long European vacation, leaving me with $14 to feed his infant children. The panic was suffocating. How was I going to buy the specialized formula? How was I going to pay the premium health insurance premiums for the twins? How was I going to cover the emergency medical bills from my complicated cesarean delivery that were due next week? Bradley knew exactly what those expenses were, and he had chosen to steal the money anyway. He wanted me desperate. He wanted me destitute. He wanted me begging his toxic parents for scraps just like they had always wanted. But then the panic stopped. It simply vanished, evaporating into the quiet air of the kitchen. It was replaced by a sudden crystal-clear realization of my own actual reality. Bradley had stolen the joint emergency fund thinking it would completely destroy me. He firmly believed I was nothing but a helpless dependent housewife, relying entirely on his mediocre corporate salary to survive. He actually thought $45,000 was all the money we had in the world. He had no idea about the corporate acquisition. He had no idea about the massive payout sitting safely in my private encrypted corporate accounts. He had no idea that I did not actually need a single penny of his stolen money to survive. The cold, calculating anger that had started when Patricia called now solidified into an unbreakable diamond in my chest. Bradley had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him in court. He had committed financial fraud against his own infant children. He had willfully abandoned his dependents and drained marital assets without consent. I closed the laptop screen with a soft click. I did not need to cry anymore. I did not need to beg. I reached for my phone and opened my private banking app, the one linked to my corporate limited liability company. I quickly transferred $10,000 into a newly created private checking account to cover the baby's immediate needs. I ordered the specialized formula using my private card and watched the confirmation screen load instantly. Bradley thought he had played the ultimate winning hand by leaving me penniless and trapped in the suburbs. He thought he had outsmarted me. I stood up and walked over to the kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street. The war had officially begun, and Bradley had no idea what was coming for him. As I stood there staring at the quiet suburban street, a sudden sharp knock at the front door shattered the silence. I flinched, my hand dropping to my healing abdomen. I expected no one. Patricia and Richard had made their position perfectly clear, and Bradley was currently cruising at 30,000 feet. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just pretend I was asleep. But then a familiar voice called out through the heavy wood. "Olivia, open the door. It is Keisha. I have baked ziti and 2 boxes of newborn diapers." Relief washed over me. Keisha was my 32-year-old sister-in-law, married to Bradley's younger brother, Connor. She was an emergency room nurse, a proud African-American woman with razor-sharp wit and zero tolerance for nonsense. More importantly, she was the only sane person in this entire toxic family tree. Keisha had always seen right through Patricia's manipulative behavior and Bradley's narcissistic tendencies. We had bonded over our shared status as outsiders in the in-law dynamic. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Keisha stood on the porch, wearing her blue hospital scrubs, holding a massive aluminum tray of food in one hand and balancing 2 bulky boxes of diapers against her hip with the other. She took one look at my pale face, my messy hair, and the dark circles under my eyes, and her professional medical assessment kicked in immediately. She did not offer empty platitudes or fake sympathy. She stepped inside, kicked the front door shut with her heel, and reached past me to engage the deadbolt, locking us securely inside. "Go sit down right now before you collapse," she ordered, marching straight into the kitchen to deposit the heavy supplies on the granite island. "You look like you are about to pass out, and I am not dealing with a medical emergency on my day off." I managed a weak smile and slowly lowered myself onto a bar stool. "Thank you, Keisha, I really mean it. The babies are sleeping for now, but we were running dangerously low on supplies. I just had to order specialty formula." Keisha started unpacking the bags, moving with the efficient energy of someone used to trauma triage. "Connor got a call from Patricia an hour ago," she said, her tone flat and completely devoid of warmth. "Your mother-in-law was practically vibrating with joy, bragging about how Bradley finally stood up for himself and took a well-deserved European vacation to escape his suffocating home life." Connor just grunted and hung up on her, but I knew immediately that something was deeply wrong. "Bradley is a selfish coward, but leaving you alone with 1-month-old twins is a new low, even for him." I stared down at the marble countertop, tracing the veins in the stone with my finger. "He did not just leave," I told her, my voice steady and devoid of tears. "He drained our joint emergency savings account right before he boarded the plane. $45,000, Keisha. He took every last cent we had saved for medical emergencies and the mortgage. He wants me completely destitute and crawling to his parents for help." Keisha stopped moving. She stood frozen by the refrigerator, a container of leftover ziti in her hands. Slowly, she placed the food on the counter and turned to face me. Her dark eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective fury. "I always knew he was a pathetic excuse for a man," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But financial abuse of his own infants is a line I did not think he had the guts to cross." "He really thinks he has you trapped." "He does," I replied, feeling that cold diamond of anger hardening further in my chest. "But he is wrong." Keisha walked around the island and pulled up a stool next to me. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out her smartphone. "Good," she said, tapping the screen, "because you are going to need that anger, Olivia. You need to take whatever sadness you are feeling right now and turn it into pure gasoline. I did not just come over here to bring you baked ziti and diapers. I came here because I found something you need to see." She unlocked her phone and opened Instagram. "I need you to brace yourself," she warned, her professional bedside manner bleeding into her voice. "Bradley is not on a boys' trip to Europe. He never was." She slid the phone across the counter. The screen displayed a private Instagram story. The account belonged to a young woman I vaguely recognized from a company holiday party last year. The video was shot inside the luxurious first-class cabin of an international flight. 2 glasses of expensive champagne were clinking together in the foreground. The camera panned up to reveal Bradley. He was wearing the brand-new cashmere sweater I had just watched him pack. He was grinning widely, looking happier and more relaxed than he had in months. And his arm was wrapped tightly around the shoulders of the young woman holding the phone. She was leaning into his chest, kissing his cheek, as the camera recorded their extravagant departure. "Her name is Madison Keisha," explained softly, as the short video looped again on the screen. "She is 24 years old. She is a junior sales representative at Bradley's office. Connor let it slip a few months ago that Bradley had been spending a lot of late nights mentoring a new hire. When Patricia called today crowing about his trip, I got suspicious. I used a burner account I keep for nosy patients to look up Madison's profile. She posted this story exactly 40 minutes ago. They are flying to Paris together, Olivia. He took your emergency savings to fund a romantic European getaway with his 24-year-old mistress." I stared at the screen, watching my husband kiss another woman while our infant son slept in the next room. I expected to feel heartbreak. I expected the familiar sting of betrayal to crush my chest and bring me to tears. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, icy clarity. The final puzzle piece had just snapped into place. Bradley had not just abandoned me because he was overwhelmed by fatherhood. He had orchestrated this entire exit strategy. He had stolen the money, lied about his travel companions, and enlisted his toxic parents to run interference and break me down emotionally while he fled the country with his young subordinate. "He is so stupid," I whispered, breaking the silence in the kitchen. Keisha looked at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Olivia, are you okay? I know this is a massive shock. I can stay the night if you need me to." I looked up from the phone and met Keisha's worried gaze. "I am perfectly fine, Keisha. I am better than fine, actually." Bradley just handed me the absolute perfect divorce case on a silver platter. He committed financial fraud, abandoned his dependents, and documented his infidelity in first class, all within the span of 3 hours. Keisha's expression shifted from concern to a slow, predatory smile. She understood exactly what I was saying. The ER nurse in her recognized that I was not going into shock. I was going into battle. "We need to move fast," I told her, pushing the phone back across the counter. "He thinks I am sitting here crying over his mediocre paycheck. He has no idea I have the resources to bury him. But I need more evidence before he realizes I know about Madison." He left his old synced iPad in the home office desk drawer when he packed. "If it is still logged into his messages and emails, we can pull everything." Keisha stood up immediately, her energy matching my own. "I will go grab the iPad right now," she said, walking purposefully toward the hallway. "You eat some of that ziti and drink a glass of water. We have a long night ahead of us, and we are going to burn his entire life to the ground." I watched Keisha turn and march down the long suburban hallway. I turned my attention back to the aluminum tray of baked ziti resting on the granite counter. My body was still aching from the cesarean section, and my stomach felt hollow from stress, but I knew Keisha was right. I needed physical strength for the war ahead. I grabbed a fork and forced myself to eat. The food was warm and strangely comforting, a stark contrast to the cold reality of my crumbling marriage. I drank a full glass of water, feeling my focus sharpen with every swallow. Bradley honestly thought he had left me broken and trapped in the suburbs. Instead, he had foolishly left me with the perfect ally and a clear path to his destruction. Keisha returned to the kitchen holding Bradley's silver iPad. She set it next to my plate. Her jaw was clenched and her dark eyes flashed with an intensity that made me pause mid-bite. "Before we open this," she said, "I need to tell you the rest of what I found out." Connor let some details slip after Patricia called him today. He did not want to tell me because he knew I would come straight to you, but I dragged it out of him. "Patricia and Richard do not just know about this trip, Olivia. They actively helped him plan it." I stopped chewing. "They knew he was leaving his twins to go to Europe?" I asked. "It is worse," Keisha replied, leaning over the counter. "They know exactly who he is traveling with. Patricia hosted a private lunch with Madison at the country club last Tuesday. Connor overheard Patricia bragging to Richard about it. She told him that Madison was a breath of fresh air. She said she was so young and accommodating, unlike certain people who just complain about being tired all the time. She praised this homewrecker for treating Bradley like the king he deserves to be. The sheer audacity of my mother-in-law was staggering. Patricia had sat across from her son's mistress sipping expensive wine and validating his infidelity while I was at home recovering from major surgery and nursing his premature infants. They had all sat around a table and decided I was disposable, a nuisance that was standing in the way of his happiness. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it bypassed sadness and mutated into unadulterated vengeance. "Unlock the tablet," I instructed, pushing my plate aside. "Let us see exactly how accommodating Madison really is." Keisha pressed the home button. The screen illuminated, prompting us for a passcode. "Try his birth year," she suggested. I typed the 4 digits. A red error message shook on the screen. "Incorrect passcode. Try the year he bought his precious vintage Porsche." I said, my fingers hovering over the glass screen. I punched in the numbers. The tablet unlocked instantly, displaying his messy home screen. He was always so predictably narcissistic. I tapped the green messages icon, and the digital vault of his deceit sprang open before our eyes. We did not even have to dig deep. The very first conversation thread was pinned to the top of his messages list under the name Maddie. I clicked the thread, and a sickening stream of texts flooded the screen. Months of explicit messages, late-night hotel rendezvous planning, and complaints about his boring suburban life. He had spent hours texting her while I was in the hospital, laboring to bring his sons into the world. He complained to her that my hospital room smelled like antiseptic, and he was bored waiting for the delivery. "Look at this." Keisha pointed to a cluster of messages from 2 weeks ago. "He is promising her the world." I read the text block. Bradley had promised Madison he was going to drain our savings and use it to treat her to a luxury European tour. He told her I was completely clueless and financially dependent on him, so I would never have the resources to fight back or hire a good lawyer. He literally typed the words, "She is trapped." Open his email app. Keisha ordered, her fingers flying across the screen. "We need the financial paper trail." We toggled over to his email client. The inbox was a goldmine of utter stupidity. Bradley had used his personal email to book the entire illicit vacation. There were confirmation receipts from a luxury travel agency detailing first-class flights to Paris, 5-star hotel suites in Rome, and private yacht charters off the Amalfi Coast. Every single booking was paid for using the exact $45,000 he had wired out of our joint emergency savings account. He had not tried to cover his tracks. He forwarded the wire transfer confirmation directly to her. I noted highlighting an email sent to Madison's corporate address. He used his work email to send financial documents to his subordinate. Human Resources is going to love this. Keisha pulled a small silver flash drive from her scrub pocket and plugged it directly into the charging port of the tablet. "I carry backup storage," she said with a ruthless smirk. "Start exporting everything." For the next hour, we worked in synchronized silence. We downloaded gigabytes of incriminating texts, explicit photographs, financial wire transfers, and luxury booking receipts. We exported his calendar showing his fake late-night client meetings that perfectly aligned with hotel charges on his hidden credit card statements. Every lie, every betrayal, and every stolen dollar was meticulously categorized and saved into a secure encrypted folder on the drive. We uploaded a secondary backup directly to my private corporate cloud server, ensuring the data was indestructible. Bradley thought he was escaping his suffocating life for a grand romantic adventure. He had no idea we were holding the digital blueprint of his complete and utter ruin. As Keisha ejected the silver flash drive, the harsh ringing of an incoming FaceTime call shattered the tense silence in the kitchen. I glanced down at my phone resting on the granite island. Bradley's contact photo illuminated the screen. He was calling me. Keisha raised her eyebrows, darting out of the camera's view. She quickly grabbed her own phone, unlocking it and positioning it just out of frame to record both the audio and video of my screen. "Answer it," she mouthed, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Let him dig his own grave." I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump and forcing my face to relax into the exhausted, overwhelmed expression he expected to see. I tapped the green accept button and propped the phone against a stack of baby formula containers. The screen flickered to life, revealing a breathtaking view of the Parisian skyline. The iconic wrought iron lattice of the Eiffel Tower glowed against the twilight sky in the background. Bradley stepped into the frame, adjusting the collar of a crisp linen shirt that looked tailored specifically for this trip. He was standing on an expansive private balcony, leaning casually against an ornate stone railing with a crystal flute of champagne in his hand. The golden hour light caught the expensive watch I had bought him for our anniversary last year. He looked entirely carefree, completely detached from the reality of the 2 infant sons he had abandoned just hours prior. "I got your frantic text message." He began, his tone dripping with condescension before I could even say a word. "You are seriously going to harass me about money the second my plane touches down in France?" "Olivia, I told you I needed this trip to decompress, and finding a demanding text about a bank transfer the moment I connect to the hotel Wi-Fi is exactly the kind of toxic behavior I am trying to escape." I kept my voice low and unsteady, playing the role of the panicked housewife he desperately wanted me to be. Bradley, the emergency savings account is completely empty, I stammered, wrapping my arms around my healing stomach. You took $45,000. That was all the money we had saved for the mortgage and the hospital bills for the twins. How am I supposed to buy groceries or pay for their medical insurance? Bradley let out a sharp, exasperated sigh, rolling his eyes at the camera, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. Oh, please, Olivia, stop being so dramatic. You always blow things entirely out of proportion. That money was sitting there doing absolutely nothing, and I am the one who earned it. I am the regional sales director. I pull the weight in our family. You sit at home all day playing with babies. You have zero concept of financial pressure or the stress of the corporate world. I took my hard-earned money to fund my mental health retreat. You have your credit cards. Figure it out. I stared at him through the screen, maintaining my facade of helplessness, while my internal recording registered every single admission of guilt. But Bradley, that was our joint fund. I pleaded softly, ensuring his admission was crystal clear for Keisha's recording. We agreed that money was strictly for emergencies. You cannot just wire $45,000 to an offshore account without telling me. The babies need specialized formula. He leaned closer to the camera, his expression twisting into an ugly sneer. This is exactly why I needed space from you, he spat, taking a sip of his champagne. You are nothing but a gold digger, Olivia. You do not care about my well-being or my mental health. You only care about my paycheck. You just want to trap me in the suburbs, draining my bank account while you contribute absolutely nothing to this marriage financially. You think because you gave birth you are entitled to every dollar I make. Well, I am putting my foot down. I am taking control of my own finances. A woman's voice giggled somewhere in the background of his luxurious hotel suite. Bradley glanced off screen for a fraction of a second, a smug smile playing on his lips, before he turned his attention back to me. Do not call me again asking about money, he commanded, his voice hardening into a direct threat. Do not text me about the mortgage or the babies or your recovery. I am paying top dollar for this suite at the Ritz, and I am going to enjoy every single second of my European vacation. If you try to ruin this mental health retreat for me, I will cut off your access to the primary checking account permanently. Learn how to budget and stop being a financial parasite. I lowered my eyes, looking away from the screen as if his cruel words had broken my spirit. Okay, Bradley, I whispered, feigning defeat. I will figure it out. Just please have a safe trip. He scoffed, shaking his head in disgust. Try to be a little more independent by the time I get back, Olivia. It is embarrassing. The call abruptly ended, the screen cutting to black. I sat completely still for a moment, letting the silence of the kitchen wash over me. Keisha slowly lowered her phone, hitting the stop button on her recording. She stared at me and let out a sharp breath. I looked up at her, dropping the exhausted housewife act instantly. The cold, hard diamond of fury in my chest had just been polished to absolute perfection. I straightened my posture, ignoring the dull ache of my surgical incision. Did you get all of that? I asked, my voice steady and crisp. Keisha nodded, tapping her screen to save the video file directly to the encrypted cloud folder. Every single word she confirmed. The finality of her statement hung in the warm air of the kitchen. I let out a long, slow breath, feeling the last lingering threads of my marital guilt evaporate into nothingness. Keisha helped me wash the dinner plates and sterilize the baby bottles, moving around my kitchen with the familiar ease of a true sister. Together we went upstairs to the nursery. The room was bathed in the soft blue glow of a nightlight. We worked in perfect silent tandem, changing Liam and Leo, feeding them the specialized formula, and rocking them until their breathing deepened into the steady rhythm of deep infant sleep. I stood over their cribs for a long time, watching their tiny chests rise and fall. They were innocent, completely oblivious to the fact that their father had just sold their future for a few weeks of luxury in France. But they had me, and I was more than enough. Keisha squeezed my shoulder and whispered that she needed to head home before Connor started asking questions about her whereabouts. We hugged tightly at the front door, a silent promise forged between us. After she locked the deadbolt behind her, I was finally alone. The house settled into a profound, heavy silence, but I did not feel lonely. I felt an exhilarating surge of power. I walked past the master bedroom, ignoring the empty space where Bradley's luggage had been, and stepped directly into my home office. It was a modest room decorated with simple neutral tones and inexpensive furniture. Bradley had always referred to this space mockingly as my little craft room. He loved telling his colleagues that his wife dabbled in some basic data entry and freelance bookkeeping for local mom and pop shops just to keep herself busy while playing house. He needed to believe that narrative. He needed to feel like the ultimate provider, the dominant force in our household. I had allowed him to believe that fiction because managing his fragile masculine ego was easier than dealing with his crippling insecurities. I locked the office door behind me and pushed aside the woven area rug near the window. Underneath the hardwood floorboards lay a flush digital safe panel that Bradley did not even know existed. I knelt down, wincing slightly at the pull in my abdomen, and typed in a complex 12-digit passcode. The heavy steel door clicked and hissed open, revealing the actual truth of my existence. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of legal binders bound in heavy black leather. I carried them to my desk and flipped open the first dossier. I did not do freelance bookkeeping. I was the sole founder and chief executive officer of a highly specialized business-to-business supply chain management software firm. Over the past 5 years, while Bradley was busy playing golf and complaining about his middle management targets, I had built a proprietary algorithmic platform that revolutionized inventory tracking for global shipping companies. I worked quietly behind the scenes, negotiating contracts with international freight conglomerates and scaling my enterprise from this very desk. I ran my fingers over the crisp parchment paper of the topmost document. It was a finalized corporate acquisition agreement, signed and countersigned, just 3 days before I went into labor with the twins. A massive multinational tech conglomerate had purchased my software firm entirely. The buyout figure printed boldly in black ink across the summary page was exactly $80 million. The funds were currently sitting in a diversified portfolio of encrypted corporate accounts, completely isolated from my personal banking and entirely invisible to my husband. Bradley had just thrown away his marriage, his children, and his entire future to steal a pathetic $45,000. He had bankrupted our fake joint account to impress a 24-year-old junior sales representative, while completely unaware that his wife was a verified multimillionaire. I let out a sharp, genuinely amused laugh that echoed off the walls of my small office. The sheer magnitude of his financial miscalculation was almost poetic, but the $80 million acquisition was not the only secret locked inside my floor safe. I set the corporate buyout documents aside and pulled out a slimmer gray folder. This one contained the real estate and property deeds. When we first got married, Bradley insisted on buying this expansive, upscale suburban home. He wanted the prestige of the neighborhood to show off to his corporate buddies. He proudly declared that he would handle the mortgage payments from his salary, while I could just transfer a small portion of my little hobby money into our joint account for groceries and utilities. What Bradley did not know was that he had terrible credit at the time of the purchase. The bank was never going to approve him for a house of this magnitude. To bypass his financial incompetence without bruising his ego, I had secretly purchased the property entirely in cash, before we even signed the marriage license. The deed resting in my hands clearly proved that this sprawling house was owned 100% by a blind limited liability company. That LLC was registered solely in my name. I was the exclusive owner of the property. For the past 5 years, Bradley believed he was paying a legitimate bank mortgage. In reality, the monthly auto draft he proudly set up from his paycheck was just funneling money directly into my private corporate holding account. He was essentially paying me rent to live in my house. He had no equity. He had no ownership stake. He had absolutely no legal right to the property whatsoever. I carefully placed the $80 million acquisition paperwork and the property deed back into the floor safe, locking it with a resounding mechanical thud. Bradley was currently drinking champagne in Paris, thinking he had executed the perfect escape, but his awakening would be brutally cold and unforgiving. My turn. The heavy steel door clicked into place. I walked over to my mahogany desk. The clock read 2 in the morning, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out a sleek black business card. It belonged to Veronica Cole. She was universally recognized as the most ruthless high-asset divorce attorney in the state. She completely dismantled the opposition, leaving them with nothing. I picked up my phone and dialed. The line rang twice before she answered. Her voice was crisp and alert. "Veronica speaking," she answered. "Veronica, this is Olivia," I said, perfectly level. "We met at the pediatric cancer benefit last November. I am the founder of the supply chain software firm we discussed. I need your services immediately." There was a brief pause. "Olivia, of course," she replied, shifting from brisk to engaged. "I remember you perfectly. What is the situation?" "My husband abandoned me and our 1-month-old twin boys to go on a European vacation with his 24-year-old subordinate," I stated. "Before boarding his flight, he drained $45,000 from our joint emergency savings account. He thinks I am a helpless stay-at-home mother. He has no idea about my company or the $80 million acquisition that closed last week." A low chuckle came through the receiver. "Oh, Olivia," she said. "He has made a catastrophic miscalculation. What are your instructions?" I leaned back, feeling the adrenaline sharpen my focus. "I want to execute a scorched earth policy," I instructed. "First, I need you to freeze and cancel every secondary credit card attached to my name. He thinks he is paying for this trip with the cash he stole, but I know he kept my platinum card as a backup. I want that card declined the second he tries to swipe it. Cut off his access to any financial safety nets connected to my profile." "Done," Veronica confirmed. "I will have my team contact the issuing banks the moment they open." "What else?" "Second, I want you to immediately list my house for sale," I commanded. "Your marital home?" she asked. "It is not a marital home," I corrected her. "The deed is entirely under an anonymous limited liability company that I formed prior to the marriage. Bradley thinks he has been paying the mortgage for the past 5 years, but his payments have been going straight into my corporate account as rent. He has 0 equity and 0 legal claim. I want you to list the house for a cash sale by tomorrow morning. Price it aggressively. I want it sold and off the market within a week. I want him to come back from Paris to a locked door and a new family living in his precious suburban castle." "That is brilliant," Veronica said. "Selling the property out from under him while he is out of the country will completely destabilize his return. Consider it handled." Third, and most importantly, I continued, dropping to a cold whisper, "I am emailing you a digital folder containing gigabytes of evidence. It includes wire transfers, booking receipts, his explicit text messages, and a recorded video call where he admits to abandoning the children and draining the accounts. I want you to draft the most aggressive divorce petition legally possible. I am filing for sole physical and legal custody of the twins. I want his parental rights severely restricted." "I will draft the petition tonight," Veronica assured me. "How do you want him served?" This was the best part of the plan. "I want you to dispatch an international courier to serve him directly at the Ritz Hotel in Paris," I ordered. "He is staying in their luxury suite. I do not want the papers slipped under his door. I want him served publicly right in front of his young mistress and everyone else. I want the sheer humiliation of his actions to hit him while he is trying to play the role of a wealthy bachelor. Let him choke on his champagne." Veronica let out another sharp laugh. "I have contacts in Paris who specialize in high-profile international service," she said. "I will have the documents translated and expedited. He will be served before he even has a chance to unpack his bags. You are incredibly well prepared, Olivia." "I do not believe in being a victim, Veronica," I replied, staring at the dark screen. I believe in consequences. He thought he could steal from his own children and treat me like garbage because he assumed he held all the financial power. I am going to teach him exactly what real power looks like. I will send over the retainer agreement right now, Veronica said. We will file the motions first thing in the morning. Get some rest, Olivia. You have a war to win. I ended the call and set the phone down on the polished wood of my desk. The wheels were officially in motion. Bradley had spent years carefully constructing his image as a successful corporate director and a devoted family man. He wore expensive suits and drove a leased sports car while looking down on me for prioritizing our family over a flashy lifestyle. He had built his entire identity on a foundation of lies. He thought he was untouchable. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the manicured lawns he cared so much about. By tomorrow afternoon, this house would be on the market. By tomorrow evening, his backup credit cards would be useless pieces of plastic. And within a few days, a courier in Paris would hand him the document that would officially end his charade. I was going to make sure that when he finally did look in the mirror, he would see exactly what he truly was. A broke homeless fraud with absolutely nothing left. The sun rose the next morning, painting the suburban skyline in brilliant shades of gold and amber. I did not sleep a single wink, but my energy was boundless, fueled by the sheer clarity of my mission. Over the next 14 days, Bradley proved my point entirely. He did not call a single time to ask about Liam or Leo. He did not send a single text message to see if my surgical incision was healing or if I had enough money to buy food. His only communication consisted of automated email receipts from his extravagant dinners in Paris and Rome, which he foolishly kept forwarding to his primary account out of sheer arrogant habit. He was actively ignoring his family, choosing instead to live out a pathetic fantasy, while I meticulously dismantled his reality brick by brick. Keisha arrived on a Tuesday morning wearing her usual dark blue hospital scrubs and carrying 2 massive iced coffees. She took one look at the towering stack of heavy-duty moving boxes in the foyer and flashed a brilliant predatory grin. A team of professional, discreet movers I had hired through my executive corporate concierge service was already dismantling the nursery upstairs. They worked with surgical precision, wrapping my expensive furniture in thick protective padding and cataloging every single item. He posted a picture in front of the Coliseum this morning, Keisha said, sliding onto a kitchen bar stool and showing me her glowing phone screen. The caption says, "Finding my absolute peace." And look closely. Olivia Madison is wearing a brand new Cartier love bracelet. I just smiled calmly, taping up a cardboard box filled with pristine newborn clothes. Let him buy her whatever shiny trinkets he wants, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. His secondary platinum credit card is officially frozen as of an hour ago. Veronica executed the court order perfectly. He will find out soon enough when his luxury hotel tries to authorize his incidentals for the week. He is currently running on borrowed time and stolen funds. The moving crew was incredibly efficient, operating under my strict and highly specific directives. They packed my designer wardrobe, the high-end nursery furniture I had purchased with my own money, my jewelry, and all of my highly classified corporate documents. We deliberately left Bradley's belongings completely untouched. It was a beautiful, poetic contrast. His cheap golf clubs, his synthetic blend, corporate suits, his outdated gaming consoles, and his ridiculous collection of craft beer glasses remained exactly where he had left them. The house began to look like a hollow shell mirroring the exact state of our dead marriage. Everything of actual value was stripped away, leaving only the cheap facade he had built for himself. While the movers worked, I finalized my living arrangements. I had instructed my private wealth manager to secure a new residence immediately, bypassing the standard real estate market entirely to ensure absolute privacy. I purchased a sprawling luxury penthouse in the heart of the financial district using a massive cashier's check drawn directly from my corporate holdings. The building was an impenetrable fortress of steel and glass, designed specifically for high-net-worth individuals who demanded absolute security. It featured private elevator access, 24-hour armed concierge service, and state-of-the-art biometric fingerprint scanners at every entrance. Bradley could never even step foot in the lavish marble lobby without being physically tackled and removed by trained security personnel. The penthouse itself was a breathtaking upgrade from the suffocating suburban house. It boasted floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city skyline, soundproof walls to ensure the babies could sleep peacefully, and a dedicated nursery wing complete with a private suite for the overnight nanny I had just hired. I was no longer playing the role of the exhausted, unsupported housewife. I was stepping fully into my power as a multimillionaire chief executive officer. I was providing my sons with a fortress where no toxic in-laws or narcissistic fathers could ever reach them. On the final day of the second week, I stood in the center of the empty suburban living room. The real estate agent had already scheduled a massive open house for the following morning. The housing market was incredibly hot right now, and Veronica assured me we would have a lucrative cash buyer locked in by the weekend. I walked through the quiet rooms feeling absolutely no nostalgia. I systematically logged into every shared utility portal on my tablet and aggressively removed my name from the accounts. I canceled the high-speed internet, the premium cable packages, the weekly landscaping service, and the municipal trash collection. I then submitted a highly restrictive change of address form, forwarding all my personal and corporate mail to a private executive post office box downtown. I wiped every smart home device, erasing my digital footprint from the thermostats, the doorbell cameras, and the security system. I left absolutely no forwarding address, no helpful notes, and no lingering clues about my whereabouts. Bradley would eventually return from Europe to a dark, freezing, empty house with no internet, no wife, no children, and absolutely no way to track me down. His manufactured suburban dream was officially terminated. Keisha and I walked out the front door for the last time. We buckled Liam and Leo securely into their plush car seats in the back of my newly purchased armored luxury SUV. Keisha hugged me tightly through the open driver's side window, promising to monitor the in-laws and report back the second they realized what was happening. I put the heavy vehicle in drive and pulled out of the neighborhood. I did not look in the rearview mirror even once. My past was completely dead, and my empire was just beginning. My past was completely dead, and my empire was just beginning. The very next morning, Veronica proved exactly why she commanded the highest legal retainer in the state. She coordinated with the premier real estate broker, who specialized in aggressive corporate relocations and high-speed cash transactions. They bypassed the traditional MLS listing and marketed the property directly to a hungry network of aggressive investors and desperate out-of-state buyers. The suburban housing market was currently experiencing an unprecedented inventory shortage, and our spacious property was prime real estate. The open house was an absolute bloodbath in the best possible way. Dozens of eager families and corporate buyers swarmed the property within hours of the private listing going live. By Tuesday afternoon, my burner phone rang. Veronica informed me that my limited liability company had received 5 competing offers. 2 of them were entirely in cash, waiving all contingencies and standard inspections. I authorized her to accept the highest cash offer, which sat comfortably at 20% over our aggressive asking price. The buyers were a wealthy relocation executive and his family who needed immediate occupancy. They wanted the keys by the end of the week and were willing to pay a massive premium for an expedited 30-day closing process, compressed into a frantic 72 hours. Since the deed was held cleanly under my corporate LLC, and there were no marital encumbrances or bank mortgages to untangle, the title company processed the transfer with blistering speed. The funds were wired directly into my encrypted corporate holding account, before Bradley even ordered his second round of escargot in Paris. With the house officially sold and the closing documents signed in black ink, I had exactly 48 hours to completely vacate the premises. My luxury items and the twins' nursery had already been secured in our new downtown penthouse fortress. The only things remaining in the sprawling suburban house were the pathetic remnants of Bradley's manufactured life. He had always prided himself on projecting an image of extreme wealth, but his actual possessions told a hilariously different story. I hired a secondary moving crew for this specific task. I did not use the premium white glove concierge service that had handled my designer wardrobe and confidential corporate servers. Instead, I hired a cheap bare-bones local hauling company that charged by the hour and asked absolutely no questions. I stood in the foyer with a clipboard directing the grumbling workers as they unceremoniously tossed his life into cheap brown cardboard boxes. There was no protective bubble wrap or careful cataloging this time. I watched a burly mover grab armfuls of Bradley's synthetic blend corporate suits off the closet hangers and shove them into a plastic bin. The suits he claimed were custom-tailored Italian wool were actually mass-produced polyester blends he bought on clearance. Next went his beloved gaming consoles and the tangled mess of cords he spent hours playing with while ignoring his pregnant wife. The movers dumped his expensive-looking but highly impractical golf clubs into a tall box, letting the metal irons crash against each other. His ridiculous collection of craft beer glasses, his grooming kits, his cheap cologne, and every single pair of his scuffed dress shoes were ruthlessly swept into the back of a rented box truck. I did not leave a single trace of his existence in that house. I even made the crew peel his pretentious motivational posters off the home gym walls. Once the truck was fully loaded, I drove ahead of them to the absolute worst part of town. I had no intention of paying premium prices to store his garbage. I found a dilapidated, sprawling storage facility situated next to a noisy industrial train yard and a heavily polluted chemical runoff canal. The facility offered basic UN climate-controlled storage lockers enclosed by a rusting chain-link fence and guarded by a single bored teenager sitting in a toll booth. I rented the smallest, cheapest unit available on the lot. It was a windowless 10 by 10 metal box with a rolling garage door that shrieked violently when pushed open. The inside smelled strongly of mildew-hot dust and industrial grease. The summer heat was already baking the corrugated metal roof, turning the interior into a suffocating oven. During the winter, it would transform into a freezing, damp icebox. It was the absolute perfect resting place for his belongings. The movers arrived and spent less than 20 minutes aggressively stacking his boxes floor to ceiling inside the sweltering metal unit. They wedged his golf bag horizontally across the top, crushing a box that contained his prized gaming headsets. I signed their invoice, tipped them in cash, and watched them drive away, leaving a cloud of exhaust fumes in their wake. I stood alone in the gravel driveway, staring at the towering pile of cardboard and plastic bins. I pulled the rolling metal door down and secured it with a heavy-duty combination padlock. I paid for exactly 1 month of rent in advance using a prepaid debit card that could never be traced back to my corporate accounts. I took a photo of the unit number and the padlock combination. I would eventually forward that single image to his email address, but not until the absolute perfect moment. As I drove my armored SUV back toward the glittering skyline of the financial district, my phone buzzed with an update from Veronica. The international courier had successfully tracked Bradley's movements through the concierge desk at the Ritz in Paris. Everything was aligning with terrifying precision. Bradley had completely financed his own destruction, and I had just locked the door on the only life he had ever known. He was a man without a home, without a family, and soon without a single penny to his name. The trap was set, and the jaws were about to snap shut. He was currently treating his young mistress to a lavish shopping spree, oblivious to the storm gathering across the ocean. I smiled, adjusting the leather steering wheel. The suburban house was sold, the cash was secured, and his cheap suits were currently baking in a metal box. My execution was completely flawless. My execution was completely flawless. Halfway across the world, the cobblestone streets of Paris were bathed in the golden afternoon sunlight. Bradley was currently strolling down the exclusive Avenue Montaigne, feeling like the absolute king of the universe. Madison walked closely beside him, her arm looped possessively through his as they approached the immaculate glass doors of the flagship Chanel boutique. He had spent the last 14 days playing the role of an extraordinarily wealthy bachelor, throwing cash around European capitals and feeding her ridiculous lies about his vast corporate fortunes. He completely believed his own fabricated reality. He thought he had successfully escaped his crying newborn twins, his recovering wife, and his mundane suburban responsibilities without a single consequence. Inside the heavily perfumed boutique, Madison floated from display to display, her eyes wide with unadulterated greed. She picked up a classic quilted lambskin flat bag, running her manicured fingers over the iconic gold interlocking logo. She turned to Bradley, batting her eyelashes and pouting her lips in a practiced display of youthful manipulation. She told him it was the only thing she wanted for their anniversary, completely ignoring the fact that they had only been sleeping together for a few months. Bradley puffed out his chest, leaning casually against a mirrored display case. He smiled a smug, arrogant smile and told the immaculately dressed sales associate that they would take it. The retail price tag dangling from the strap read €5,000. To Bradley, it was just a drop in the bucket of the $45,000 he had stolen from his infant sons. He strutted over to the polished marble checkout counter, sliding his secondary platinum credit card across the surface with a practiced flick of his wrist. He was ready to bask in Madison's adoration. The elegant sales associate inserted the heavy metal card into the terminal. Bradley wrapped his arm around Madison's waist, pulling her close while waiting for the receipt to print. Instead, the terminal let out a sharp, obnoxious beep. The sales associate frowned slightly, pulling the card out and wiping the chip before inserting it again. Another sharp beep echoed through the quiet luxury boutique. "I am so sorry, monsieur," the associate said, her French accent thick and dripping with polite retail condescension. "Your card has been declined. Do you perhaps have another form of payment?" Bradley's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he quickly recovered his facade. He let out a loud theatrical sigh, rolling his eyes for Madison's benefit. "It is just an international security block," he declared loudly enough for the other wealthy patrons in the boutique to hear. "My bank is incredibly strict about foreign transactions to protect my assets. Just run it again. It happens to high-net-worth clients all the time." The associate remained perfectly blank-faced and ran the card a third time. The machine beeped its harsh denial once more. The screen flashed a red error message indicating the account was entirely frozen. "I apologize, monsieur, but the issuing bank is refusing the charge," she stated, sliding the useless piece of plastic back across the marble counter. "We cannot complete this transaction." Madison dropped her arm from his waist, her face flushing with sudden embarrassment as nearby shoppers turned their heads to watch the unfolding scene. Bradley snatched the card off the counter, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He opened his mouth, prepared to unleash a furious tirade on the poor sales associate and demand to speak to the boutique manager. Before a single word could escape his lips, a tall, sharply dressed man in a tailored gray suit stepped smoothly up to the register. He had been quietly observing the couple from the doorway. He bypassed Madison entirely and stepped directly into Bradley's personal space. Bradley, the man asked, his voice carrying a crisp, authoritative tone that commanded immediate attention. Bradley spun around aggressively, glaring at the stranger. "Who wants to know?" He snapped, his corporate bravado failing to mask his growing panic. The man did not blink. He simply reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a remarkably thick, heavy manila envelope secured with official red legal seals. He pressed the envelope firmly against Bradley's chest, forcing him to take it or let it drop to the pristine boutique floor. "You have been formally served," the man stated in perfect, unaccented English. "Have a wonderful afternoon in Paris." The international process server turned on his heel and walked calmly out the glass doors, disappearing into the Parisian crowd before Bradley could even process what had just happened. Madison stared at the envelope, her eyes darting nervously around the silent boutique. Bradley's hands began to shake uncontrollably as he ripped open the red seals and pulled out a massive stack of legal documents. The very first page bore the official seal of our home state family court system. Printed in bold black lettering across the top was a petition for absolute divorce and full physical custody. Bradley's eyes darted frantically across the pages, his breathing turning shallow and rapid. Veronica had drafted a masterpiece of legal destruction. The documents explicitly detailed his financial fraud, exposing the exact root of the $45,000 he had wired out of our emergency savings. But the killing blow was the second packet of paper stapled beneath the divorce petition. It was a court-ordered temporary restraining order granted by a highly unsympathetic judge. The order explicitly froze his access to every single marital account, every credit line, and every financial asset bearing his name, pending a full financial investigation. "What is it?" Madison demanded, her voice shrill and embarrassed as she stepped further away from him. "What does that say, Bradley?" He ignored her completely, desperately pulling his smartphone from his pocket. His fingers fumbled violently as he opened his banking application. He typed his credentials, praying the court papers were just a massive bluff. The banking application loaded, and the digital numbers that materialized on his screen confirmed his absolute worst nightmare. Every single account bearing his name displayed a glaring red padlock icon. His checking account, his personal savings, and the remaining balance of the stolen $45,000 were entirely locked down by the judicial order. He had a grand total of 0 available funds. Madison snatched the legal documents right out of his trembling hands. Her eyes skimmed the bold print of the restraining order and the divorce petition. Her youthful infatuation vanished in an instant, replaced by the cold, calculating realization that she had been played. "You lied to me!" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the mirrored walls of the boutique. "You told me you were a multimillionaire. You told me your wife was just a crazy dependent who lived off your wealth." Bradley reached for her arm, desperately trying to salvage his shattered facade. "Maddie, please," he begged, his voice cracking with panic. "It is just a misunderstanding. My lawyers will sort this out immediately. I just need to make a few phone calls." Madison ripped her arm away from his grasp, as if his touch was suddenly diseased. The sales associate stepped out from behind the marble counter. Her polite smile now replaced with a stern frown. She firmly asked them to leave the boutique before she summoned security. Bradley stumbled out onto the cobblestone street, his face burning with humiliation. They rushed back to the Ritz Hotel. Bradley marched up to the concierge desk, demanding to charge a flight back to the United States directly to his room tab. The manager tapped at his keyboard and looked up with a polite expression. "I apologize, monsieur, but the credit card on file for your incidentals has just been declined by your issuer," he stated clearly. "We require a valid form of payment immediately, or we must ask you to vacate the suite." Bradley felt the blood drain from his face. He patted his pockets, but he had spent his last euros on lunch. Madison did not wait to hear another word. She spun around and marched directly to the elevators, leaving Bradley standing paralyzed in the opulent lobby. By the time he sprinted up to their luxury suite, she was already zipping up her luggage. "Maddie, what are you doing?" he pleaded. "We can figure this out. Just pay for the flights with your corporate card, and I will reimburse you the second my accounts are unfrozen." She let out a laugh that cut him to the bone. "You really think I am going to finance your escape?" she scoffed, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "I am 24 years old, Bradley. I do not do broke men with angry wives and frozen assets. A guy I met at the hotel bar yesterday invited me to join him on his private yacht in Ibiza. Consider this vacation over." She walked right past him, leaving him completely alone in the massive suite. The walls of the room suddenly felt like a prison. The hotel management gave him exactly 1 hour to pack his things and vacate the premises, with no other options. And his pride pulverized. Bradley sat on the edge of the unmade bed and dialed his mother. Patricia answered on the second ring. "Mom, I need you to wire me some money immediately," he whispered. glancing nervously at the door. Olivia somehow found out about the trip. She filed for divorce and got a judge to freeze every single one of my bank accounts. I am stranded in Paris and the hotel is throwing me out. Patricia shrieked through the receiver, her voice panicking. What do you mean? She froze your accounts, she demanded. How could she possibly afford a lawyer capable of doing that? We told you to handle her carefully, Bradley. Where is that girl you took with you? She left me, Mom, he admitted. Please, I just need enough for a flight back to the States. I will deal with Olivia the second I walk through the front door. I will make her drop this entire ridiculous lawsuit. Patricia launched into a tirade, cursing Olivia for being a woman, but she eventually relented. She wired exactly enough money for a basic economy ticket on the cheapest airline she could find. There was no first-class upgrade this time. There was no champagne. Bradley dragged his heavy suitcase through the crowded terminal, feeling like an absolute peasant. He waited in the sprawling economy line, surrounded by crying children and exhausted tourists. His linen shirt was wrinkled, and he was sweating profusely under the harsh fluorescent lights. When he finally boarded the plane, he had to squeeze his frame into a tiny middle seat. He spent the transatlantic flight trapped between two snoring strangers, drinking warm water from a plastic cup and stewing in a rage. He blamed Olivia for Madison leaving him for the humiliation at the boutique and for forcing him to beg his parents for a rescue. He convinced himself she was just throwing a tantrum to get his attention. As the plane touched down back in the United States, Bradley pulled his smartphone from his pocket and disabled airplane mode. He opened his messages app and typed out a furious, threatening text to his wife. You are dead to me. He wrote, his thumbs hitting the glass screen. I am coming home right now to teach you a lesson you will never forget. You are going to regret ever messing with my money. He hit send and shoved the phone into his pocket, a scowl returning. He was fully and utterly prepared to march into his suburban castle and demand absolute submission. He had absolutely no idea that he was threatening a ghost. He did not realize there was no house waiting for him, no wife cowering in the living room, and no home left to return to. Bradley stormed through the arrivals terminal with a fierce scowl etched across his unshaven face. His muscles ached from the miserable economy flight. He bypassed the luxury car service kiosks he usually frequented because those required a working platinum card. Instead, he marched outside into the muggy afternoon heat and joined the chaotic line for a standard city taxi. He clutched his designer suitcase, tightly, his knuckles white. He had just enough physical cash left from his mother to cover the fare. He slid into a yellow cab, barking his address at the driver and slumping back. During the long ride, Bradley stared out the window, rehearsing the brutal speech he was going to deliver to Olivia. He pictured her cowering in the living room, crying and apologizing. He would demand she immediately drop the divorce petition and unlock his accounts before he even considered forgiving her. He convinced himself that her extreme actions were simply a desperate plea for his attention. She was testing his limits and he was going to reassert his dominance over his household. He smoothed his wrinkled linen shirt, trying to regain his usual corporate authority. The taxi turned onto his familiar tree-lined street, pulling up to the curb outside his property. Bradley tossed a wad of crumpled bills over the front seat, ignoring the driver. He hauled his suitcase out of the trunk and stepped onto the pristine sidewalk. He paused, looking up at the sprawling two-story house. Something felt slightly off, but anger clouded his perception. A silver luxury sedan was parked in the driveway. He sneered, assuming one of Olivia's few friends had come over to comfort her. It did not matter. He was going to kick them out immediately. He marched up the slate walkway, dragging his luggage behind him. He climbed the steps to the front porch and pulled out his heavy silver keychain. He isolated the brass house key and thrust it forcefully into the deadbolt of the heavy oak door. He twisted his wrist, expecting the familiar click of the lock yielding to his command. The key refused to turn. Bradley frowned, jamming it back in. He twisted harder, putting his shoulder into the motion, the metal ground stubbornly refusing to budge a single millimeter. A fresh wave of blinding anger washed over him. Olivia had actually changed the locks. The sheer audacity pushed him over the edge. He balled his hand into a tight fist and began pounding furiously against the solid wood. "Open the door. Olivia," he bellowed, his voice carrying to the neighboring properties. "I know you are in there. You cannot lock me out of my own house. Open this door right now before I kick it down." He pounded again, rattling the frame. The brass handle suddenly clicked and turned from the inside. Bradley stepped back, puffing his chest out into a mask of pure intimidation. He was ready to unleash verbal hell. The heavy door swung inward, but Olivia was not standing in the foyer. Instead, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a casual gray t-shirt stepped out onto the porch. The bearded man completely blocked the doorway, staring down at Bradley with a mixture of confusion and intense hostility. Bradley blinked, his brain struggling to process the visual information. He looked past the massive stranger trying to peer into the house. The entryway walls, which had always been painted a soft beige, were now a crisp, stark white. "Who the hell are you?" Bradley demanded, his voice cracking slightly as his corporate bravado faltered. "What are you doing in my house? Where is Olivia?" The large man crossed his muscular arms, planting his feet firmly on the welcome mat. "I have no idea who Olivia is," the stranger replied, his voice a deep rumbling baritone. "But this is not your house, pal. My family and I just bought this property last week. We closed the cash sale 3 days ago, and we are currently unpacking our boxes. Now back away from my front door before we have a serious problem." Bradley felt the blood drain from his face. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. "That is impossible," he stammered, taking a step forward. "You cannot buy a house in 3 days. My name is Bradley. I live here. This is my property. My wife is just playing a sick joke on me." The stranger held his ground. "Look, man, I do not know what kind of domestic dispute you have going on, but you need to leave right now. I bought this place legally from a holding company. The deed is in my name. You are trespassing on private property." A woman appeared behind the large man holding a smartphone. She looked anxious but determined. "Honey," she said, "I am calling the local precinct right now. The police dispatcher says a patrol car is already in the neighborhood." Bradley stared at the woman and the completely unfamiliar furniture stacked in his former living room. The devastating reality struck him with the force of a freight train. The deed. The house had never been in his name. It was entirely owned by Olivia Anonymous Limited Liability Company. She had legally and ruthlessly sold the entire estate right out from under him while he was sipping champagne in Paris. He had spent 5 years bragging about a house he never actually owned, and his wife had liquidated it for cash in a matter of days. The faint, piercing wail of local police sirens began to echo in the distance. Absolute and primal panic seized Bradley. He grabbed the handle of his designer suitcase, his hands shaking violently. He turned away from the porch and scrambled down the slate walkway, practically running across the manicured grass he used to pay to maintain. He fled down the tree-lined street, a broke, humiliated, and completely broken man, running terrified from the very suburban kingdom he once thought he ruled unconditionally. Bradley ran terrified from the suburban kingdom he once thought he ruled. He hauled his designer suitcase down the scorching pavement for 3 grueling blocks before his exhausted legs gave out. With no money for another taxi and his platinum cards entirely useless, he endured the ultimate humiliation of calling his mother collect from a convenience store payphone. Patricia drove her massive luxury SUV to pick him up outside a dingy local gas station, gasping in absolute horror when she saw her precious son sweating heavily through his completely ruined and wrinkled linen shirt. She ushered him into the pristine interior of her vehicle, cooing over him as if he were an injured child, while hurling vicious insults at Olivia. Bradley slumped against the passenger window, entirely defeated. He left for Paris feeling like a corporate conqueror and returned looking like a disheveled vagrant. The drive back to his parents' sprawling estate was filled with Patricia declaring she would personally drag Olivia through the mud forever. When they arrived, Richard was waiting in the formal living room swirling a glass of expensive scotch. He took one look at his son and shook his head in absolute disgust, offering no word of comfort. Richard only cared about optics, and his son looked like a complete liability. Bradley collapsed onto the expensive velvet sofa, burying his face in his hands. He recounted the absolute nightmare of the past 48 hours, explaining how the process server humiliated him, how Madison abandoned him, and how the judge froze every single marital account. The final blow that made Richard slam his crystal glass down on the mahogany coffee table was the revelation about the house. Bradley confessed that the suburban property was never in his name, and Olivia had legally sold it for cash. Patricia shrieked that Olivia was a criminal, a manipulative sociopath who planned to ruin their family, demanding Richard call their lawyers immediately. Richard ignored his wife, frantic pacing. He picked up his tablet from the side table, unlocking the screen with a heavy sigh. He intended to pull up the contact information for a vicious litigation attorney he kept on retainer. As the screen illuminated, the financial news application automatically refreshed its daily feed. Richard's thumb hovered over the glass, suddenly freezing in place. His eyes narrowed, zooming in on a specific headline featured in the local business mergers and acquisitions section. He read the paragraph once, then, twice, his face draining of all color. The crystal glass of scotch sat forgotten. Patricia stopped pacing, noticing her husband's sudden rigid posture. She asked what was wrong, but Richard looked up slowly, locking his gaze onto his son. He asked Bradley what exactly Olivia did for a living. Bradley muttered she just did basic data entry for local mom-and-pop shops. Richard shoved the glowing screen directly into Bradley's face, ordering him to read the headline out loud. Bradley squinted at the text. The bold black letters announced that a local business-to-business supply chain software firm had just been acquired by a massive global tech conglomerate. The founder and chief executive officer was listed clearly as Olivia, with a high-resolution corporate headshot attached. The purchase price was plastered across the top of the page in undeniable clarity. $80 million paid entirely in cash. The silence falling over the velvet living room was absolute. Bradley stared at the photograph of his wife looking powerful, polished, and radiant in a tailored business suit. She looked like an absolute titan. Patricia rushed over, peering over her son's shoulder. She let out a sharp gasp, gripping the back of the sofa. $80 million, she whispered, the words sounding foreign. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The toxic outrage over the house completely evaporated. A new, dark, suffocating greed flooded the space, replacing every other emotion. Richard stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a newfound sense of dark purpose. He paced the room, calculating the legal angles with predatory speed. He looked at Bradley, who was still staring blankly at the $80 million figure. Richard ordered his son to stop feeling sorry for himself and think like a ruthless businessman. The divorce petition Olivia filed was no longer a threat. It was the absolute greatest financial opportunity of their entire lives. Patricia caught on to his sinister logic. Her eyes widened with toxic delight as she began outlining their new strategy. She declared that Olivia had clearly built this massive software empire while living under Bradley's roof, eating the food he bought, and sleeping in the bed he provided. She argued that Bradley was the primary breadwinner who carried the financial burden, allowing Olivia the free time to develop her project into an $80 million enterprise. Patricia reasoned Bradley was legally entitled to 50%. Bradley slowly lifted his head, the panic in his eyes morphing into a sick, greedy realization. The humiliation of Paris and the front-lawn confrontation suddenly felt like minor inconveniences on the path to a $40 million payday. He no longer wanted to teach Olivia a lesson by making her beg for his return. He wanted to bleed her completely dry. Richard instructed Bradley to ignore the temporary restraining order. They would hire the most predatory divorce firm money could buy, using Richard's private assets to fund the war. They would stall the divorce proceedings indefinitely, burying Olivia under a mountain of aggressive financial audits. But Patricia wanted to strike a faster and far more devastating blow. Patricia reminded them that Olivia was currently alone in the city with two newborn infants. They needed to prove that Olivia was an unstable corporate workaholic who posed a direct danger to her children. Patricia smiled maliciously, suggesting they call Child Protective Services immediately to report her. If they could somehow rip those babies out of her own arms, she would easily and instantly surrender every single dollar to get them safely back. The depraved suggestion of Patricia hung heavy in the velvet living room, but absolutely no one objected. Instead, Richard nodded slowly, pouring himself another generous glass of expensive scotch with a cold, calculating glint in his eye. He praised his wife for her ruthless and brilliant ingenuity. Bradley sat on the sofa, his initial shock completely replaced by a sickening surge of adrenaline. The idea of using his own infant sons as pawns in a high-stakes extortion scheme did not bother his conscience for a single second. He was entirely consumed by the intoxicating prospect of securing $40 million. If taking custody of Liam and Leo meant forcing Olivia to the negotiating table, then he was fully prepared to play the role of the deeply concerned father. Patricia immediately began coaching her son on exactly what to say. She paced the expensive Persian rug, listing off the specific clinical buzzwords that would guarantee an emergency response from the authorities. Postpartum psychosis, severe sleep deprivation, erratic behavior, and threats of imminent physical harm. They were going to paint a terrifying picture of a mentally shattered woman who had violently locked her husband out of their home and fled with two fragile newborns into the city. Bradley pulled out his smartphone, dialing the state emergency hotline for child welfare. He cleared his throat, forcing his voice to tremble with manufactured panic as the dispatcher answered the call. He identified himself as Bradley, a desperate, terrified father who had just returned from a mandatory overseas business trip to find his home sold and his mentally unstable wife missing with their 1-month-old twins. He lied effortlessly, pouring pure venom into the phone receiver. He claimed Olivia had been exhibiting terrifying signs of severe postpartum psychosis before he left, refusing to sleep, crying uncontrollably, and making completely irrational statements about harming the children. Patricia hovered right over his shoulder, whispering additional horrific, fabricated details for him to repeat. Bradley told the dispatcher that Olivia had completely drained their bank accounts in a manic episode and secured a dangerous hideout somewhere downtown. He begged them to intervene immediately, stating he feared for the very lives of his infant sons. The dispatcher, alarmed by the severity of the allegations and the specific legal terminology Bradley used, flagged the case as a Priority 1 emergency. They assured him an investigator would be dispatched to the new address the exact moment they could locate her through the financial records he provided. After disconnecting the call, Bradley let out a deep breath he had been holding and exchanged a triumphant, arrogant look with his parents. Richard clapped his son hard on the back, praising his stellar performance. The legal strategy was incredibly sinister but frighteningly simple. Once Child Protective Services removed the twins from the care of Olivia due to the severe allegations of mental instability, Bradley would immediately file for emergency sole custody. With the children legally placed in his direct control at his parents' sprawling estate, Olivia would be completely emotionally destroyed. Richard explained that a desperate mother separated from her newborns would sign absolutely anything to get them back. They would draft a private settlement agreement offering to drop the custody battle and close the child welfare investigation in exchange for a clean 50% split of the $80 million software acquisition. They were weaponizing motherhood against her. Bradley smiled, imagining the look of utter defeat on the face of Olivia when the state authorities knocked on her door. He poured himself a drink, finally feeling like the corporate conqueror he always pretended to be. He firmly believed his wife had played her best hand by selling the suburban house, but he was about to flip the entire board upside down. Miles away from their toxic plotting, Olivia was experiencing the exact opposite of a psychological breakdown. Inside the highly secure luxury downtown penthouse, the atmosphere was serene. and perfectly organized. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, illuminating the pristine living space. Liam and Leo were sleeping soundly in their state-of-the-art nursery, watched over by a highly qualified pediatric nurse Olivia had hired with her corporate funds. Olivia sat at the massive marble kitchen island, dressed in comfortable silk loungewear, reviewing legal documents sent over by Veronica. Her mind was razor-sharp, her physical recovery was progressing beautifully, and her stress levels were practically non-existent, now that Bradley was entirely removed from her daily life. Keisha had arrived for a morning visit bringing fresh pastries from a bakery down the street. The two women sat together sipping premium coffee and reviewing the chaotic security footage from the suburban house showing Bradley having his absolute meltdown on the front lawn the previous afternoon. They laughed at his complete inability to comprehend his new reality. Olivia felt a profound sense of absolute peace. She had secured her children, protected her massive financial assets, and cleanly severed the dead weight of her toxic marriage. The tranquil morning was suddenly interrupted by a sharp chime from the penthouse advanced security intercom system. Olivia frowned, setting her coffee mug down on the marble counter. She tapped the digital screen mounted on the wall to view the lobby camera feed. The armed concierge was standing rigidly at his desk, looking deeply uncomfortable. He pressed his communication button, informing Olivia that there was an urgent situation in the lobby. A state investigator from Child Protective Services, accompanied by two uniformed police officers, demanded immediate access to her private residence. Keisha stood up instantly, realizing that Bradley had launched a dirty counterattack. Olivia did not panic or show a single ounce of fear. The cold logic of a chief executive completely overrode any maternal panic. She tapped the intercom, instructing the concierge to escort them up. She asked Keisha to wake the nurse and prepare the medical files. Bradley wanted to play a dirty legal game, but he had walked into a trap. Bradley walked into a trap. I stood from the marble island, smoothing my silk loungewear, and walked to the grand double doors with Keisha beside me. I was a fully in control chief executive standing inside a multi-million-dollar fortress. I pulled open the heavy doors, revealing a stern-looking woman in a sharp business suit, flanked by two police officers. The investigator expected to find a frantic, manic woman barricaded in a messy apartment. Instead, she found me holding a cup of premium coffee in a tranquil, sunlit foyer. "Are you, Olivia?" she asked, her tone faltering as she took in the panoramic views behind me. "I am Agent Davis with Child Protective Services. We received an emergency report claiming you are suffering from severe postpartum psychosis and pose an immediate physical threat to your infant twins. We need to enter right now." I stepped aside, opening the doors wide. "Please come right in," I said, projecting absolute calm. "My sons are sleeping in their nursery down the hall." The two police officers stepped into the living room, keeping their hands near their duty belts. They scanned the immaculate space, finding nothing. The penthouse was flawlessly organized. There was no chaos and no signs of a mental breakdown. Agent Davis walked cautiously across the hardwood floors. "The caller stated that you violently locked your husband out, drained your accounts, and fled to a dangerous hideout," she explained. Reading from her official report, he claimed you are dangerously sleep-deprived and threatening harm to the babies. I simply smiled and motioned toward the hallway. "Let us start with the most important thing," I suggested. "Let me show you my children." I led the investigator and officers to the nursery wing. I pushed open the door to reveal the room. Soft classical music played. Liam and Leo were sleeping peacefully in matching cribs. Sitting nearby was the pediatric nurse. She stood up, greeting the officers. Agent Davis stepped forward to inspect the twins. She noted their healthy color and the complete absence of any distress. The narrative of a psychotic, dangerous mother was disintegrating right before her eyes. After confirming the babies were safe, I guided the authorities back to the marble island. I pulled my encrypted tablet across the counter and unlocked the screen. "Agent Davis." "I know exactly who made that malicious phone call," I stated, seating myself across from her. It was my estranged husband Bradley and his mother Patricia. They are attempting to extort me for $40 million. I will show you exactly why they are desperate enough to weaponize your agency against me. I opened the first file showing her the medical records confirming the twins were thriving. Next, I displayed the certified legal deed to my previous suburban home, proving I had every right to sell the property. Then I pulled up the redacted corporate acquisition documents highlighting the $80 million buyout of my software firm. I proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I did not drain a shared account to flee. But the absolute final nail in the coffin was the digital folder Keisha and I had compiled. I tapped the screen and played the security video from the day Bradley abandoned us. The high-definition audio echoed clearly. Agent Davis and the two police officers listened in stunned silence as Bradley stared right at the camera and stated that the babies were too noisy and he needed space to find himself. They watched him zip his luxury suitcase and walk out the front door, leaving me alone. I followed that video immediately with the recorded FaceTime call from Paris. The authorities watched Bradley sip champagne on a French balcony while bragging about draining $45,000 from our emergency savings to fund his romantic getaway with his subordinate. They heard him explicitly threaten to cut off my financial access if I ruined his trip. As you can clearly see, I am not suffering from postpartum psychosis. I explained. I am simply a mother, protecting her children from an abusive absent father. Bradley realized yesterday that I sold my house and froze his stolen funds. This phone call was a retaliatory strike to strip me of custody so he could extort my assets. Agent Davis stared at the dark screen. Her rigid defensive posture was gone, replaced by radiating professional fury. She had been manipulated and used as an attack dog by a greedy family. She closed her folder with a sharp snap. Mrs. Olivia, this case is officially closed, as of this exact second. She declared, her voice hard. Your children are in a safe, thriving environment. There is absolutely zero evidence of neglect here. She stood up, gesturing for the police officers to head toward the door. However, she continued, my agency does not take kindly to being weaponized for leverage in a divorce proceeding. Filing a false report of child abuse is a severe criminal offense in this state. Keisha smiled, leaning against the refrigerator. So what happens to them now? She asked, crossing her arms. Agent Davis adjusted her suit jacket, her eyes flashing with bureaucratic vengeance. I am returning to my office to draft a comprehensive report of this encounter, she stated. I will be submitting the audio files and evidence you provided directly to the district attorney. We will be pursuing Bradley and Patricia for filing a malicious false report and wasting emergency state resources. They wanted to involve the authorities in their divorce strategy. Now they will get to experience exactly what that means. I walked them to the double doors, thanking them for their time. As the heavy doors clicked shut behind them, I turned back to Keisha. The silence in the penthouse felt electric. Bradley had tried to play his dirtiest card to break me, but he had just handed me the criminal charges needed to guarantee he would never get joint custody of my sons. The trap had officially snapped shut, and the final execution was imminent. The trap had officially snapped shut, and the final execution was imminent. 2 weeks later, the heavy glass doors of the County Family Court Mediation Center slid open. I stepped into the polished marble lobby wearing a sharp-tailored emerald green power suit that practically screamed untouchable corporate executive. Veronica, my ruthlessly efficient attorney, walked in lockstep beside me, holding a sleek leather briefcase containing the absolute destruction of my estranged husband. Today was the mandatory court mediation session, a required legal hurdle, before a judge would officially finalize the divorce and rule on the asset division. It was the absolute perfect stage for my final performance. We approached the designated waiting area outside Chamber 4. Bradley was already there, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, attempting to project an aura of total dominance. He wore a navy blue suit that looked slightly wrinkled, likely pulled straight from the sweltering metal storage unit where his belongings were currently baking. Flanking him on either side were his toxic enablers, Patricia and Richard, looking incredibly smug. Standing next to them was a slick, aggressively tanned attorney, wearing a flashy watch, who looked exactly like the kind of predatory lawyer Richard would hire to bully a supposedly helpless housewife. As soon as Patricia spotted me walking down the corridor, her eyes lit up with malicious delight. She could not resist the urge to launch a preemptive strike. She marched right up to me, ignoring the formal setting of the courthouse. "You really thought you could outsmart us, Olivia?" she sneered, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet hallway. "You thought you could sell my son out of his own house and hide your little software money from the family that supported you? You are an absolute disgrace of a mother. Bradley is going to take half of everything you own and leave you completely ruined. By the time our lawyer is done with you, you will be begging to come back to the suburbs." I did not flinch. I did not break stride or offer a defensive retort. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my premium iced coffee, looking at her over the rim of the cup with absolute freezing indifference. Veronica let out a soft, highly amused chuckle, stepping smoothly between us. "Save your breath for the mediator," Patricia Veronica advised, her tone dripping with professional condescension. "You are going to need every single ounce of that misplaced confidence in about 5 minutes. Patricia scoffed, crossing her arms and glaring daggers at my back as the bailiff opened the heavy wooden doors to Chamber 4. We filed into the expansive mediation room, taking our seats on opposite sides of a long oak conference table. The court-appointed mediator, a stern-looking retired judge, sat at the head of the table adjusting his glasses. Bradley sat directly across from me, flashing a deeply arrogant smile. He honestly believed he had the upper hand. He thought his false Child Protective Services report was still a viable threat, completely unaware that Agent Davis had already forwarded her malicious reporting file to the district attorney. He thought he was walking into a negotiation. He was actually walking into a slaughterhouse. The mediator cleared his throat, officially opening the session and instructing the legal counsels to present their initial demands. Bradley's slick lawyer stood up instantly, pacing confidently behind his client. He buttoned his flashy suit jacket and launched into a highly rehearsed, completely fabricated narrative designed to paint my husband as a corporate martyr. "Your Honor, we are here today to claim exactly what my client is legally and morally entitled to." The lawyer began, his voice booming across the room. "For the past 5 years, Bradley has been the absolute primary breadwinner of this household. He worked grueling hours in a highly stressful corporate management position, specifically to provide a stable suburban home for his wife. He paid the mortgage, he bought the groceries, he carried the massive financial burden of their lifestyle so that Olivia could have the free time and the peace of mind to pursue her little work-from-home technology project." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, taking another sip of my coffee. Bradley nodded along with his lawyer, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Patricia shot me a triumphant glare from the gallery seating against the wall. That little project, as we all now know, recently sold to a massive tech conglomerate for a staggering $80 million, the lawyer continued, placing his hands flat on the oak table and leaning forward aggressively. "My client sacrificed his own peace of mind to fund her dreams. Without his steady paycheck and his unwavering emotional support, Olivia would never have had the safety net required to build a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Therefore, we are demanding a clean 50% split of the $80 million acquisition payout, $40 million to be transferred immediately into my client accounts." The sheer audacity of the demand was almost breathtaking, but the lawyer was not finished. Furthermore, he added, pointing a finger in my direction, "because my client is currently experiencing severe emotional distress from her sudden and violent abandonment, we are also demanding permanent monthly spousal support." Olivia aggressively locked him out of his own home, forcing him to live in substandard conditions while she hides in a luxury penthouse. "We are also filing for joint physical custody of the infant twins, which will naturally require Olivia to pay substantial child support to maintain their standard of living while they are in their father care. We want $40 million permanent alimony and full access to the children. Those are our non-negotiable terms." The lawyer sat down, looking incredibly smug. Bradley leaned back in his leather chair, crossing his arms and raising his eyebrows at me as if to say, "Checkmate." He firmly believed he had completely cornered me. He thought the threat of losing half my fortune and paying him a monthly salary for the rest of his life would force me to surrender immediately. He expected me to cry or beg for a lower settlement. The mediator turned his attention to my side of the table. He asked Veronica if we had a response to these massive financial demands. Veronica did not stand up. She did not pace around the room or raise her voice. She simply opened her sleek leather briefcase with a quiet, terrifying click. She pulled out a single pristine manila folder and placed it squarely in the center of the oak table. "We have a very brief response to opposing counsel fabricated fairy tale," Veronica stated, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. "My client will not be paying a single cent of the $80 million. She will not be paying permanent spousal support. And your client will absolutely never receive joint custody of those infants. In fact, by the time we leave this room, your client is going to be the one writing us a check." Bradley's arrogant smile faltered for a fraction of a second. His slick lawyer let out a loud, dismissive laugh, leaning forward to examine the folder Veronica had produced. He asked what magical piece of paper could possibly negate a standard marital asset split in this state. I set my coffee cup down, folding my hands neatly on the table. It was finally time to drop the hammer. Veronica smoothly unclasped the manila folder and slid a thick stack of stapled documents across the polished oak table directly toward Bradley and his suddenly quiet attorney. The top page featured a highly official notary seal, dated exactly 5 years ago. I watched Bradley stare at the paper, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. His lawyer picked up the document, adjusting his flashy watch, and began scanning the first page. Within seconds, the aggressive tan on his face vanished. He looked up at Bradley with an expression of pure, unfiltered fury. "You told me there was no prenuptial agreement," the lawyer hissed through gritted teeth, slamming the document down on the table. Bradley blinked, looking entirely lost. "There is no prenuptial agreement," he stammered defensively. "We never signed anything like that. I would remember signing away my rights." Veronica leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table and clasping her hands together. Her smile was absolutely lethal. "Actually, Bradley, you did," she corrected him, her voice dripping with venomous delight. "5 years ago, when you were completely obsessed with protecting your mediocre corporate salary and your leased sports car from what you called my inevitable financial dependence, you practically sprinted to a notary. You insisted we sign a mutual asset protection agreement before walking down the aisle. You were so incredibly eager to shield your middle management paycheck from me that you did not even bother to read the fine print." I kept my eyes locked on Bradley, watching the devastating realization wash over his features. I remembered that day perfectly. He had slapped the generic online template down on our kitchen counter, acting like a high-rolling tycoon, protecting his vast empire from a gold-digging bride. I had simply taken the document to my own highly skilled corporate attorneys and had them weave in a few airtight clauses before we finalized it. "If you turn to page 14, subsection C," Veronica instructed the opposing counsel, her tone brisk and authoritative. "You will find a very specific and legally bulletproof clause. It explicitly dictates that any and all commercial enterprises, software intellectual property, limited liability companies, and business assets founded or registered by either party remain 100% separate, sole property. There is absolutely no commingling of business assets permitted regardless of when the business was established or how much it appreciates in value during the marriage." The slick lawyer flipped frantically to page 14, reading the clause with wide, panicked eyes. He swallowed hard, realizing his entire $40 million extortion strategy had just been completely incinerated. The $80 million software acquisition belongs entirely and exclusively to Olivia, Veronica stated, dropping the legal hammer with devastating precision. "Bradley is not entitled to a single penny of that money. He has no equity, no claim, and no legal standing to demand half of an enterprise he did not even know existed until he read about it in the local business news. Patricia slammed her hands against her chair in the gallery, unable to contain her outrage. "This is trickery!" she shrieked, ignoring the mediator's stern glare. He supported her. He paid the bills while she played on her computer. He deserves compensation. The mediator slammed his gavel, demanding immediate silence from the gallery. Bradley sat frozen, his jaw hanging slack as he stared at the signed prenuptial agreement. The fantasy of his massive $40 million payday was evaporating right before his very eyes. But his lawyer, desperate to salvage his expensive retainer, quickly shifted tactics. "Fine," the slick lawyer countered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "The business assets are protected. But that does not change the fact that Olivia locked my client out of his home and denied him access to their shared emergency savings. We are still demanding maximum spousal support and the immediate return of his $45,000. I let out a soft, genuinely amused laugh. I looked at Veronica, nodding slightly. It was time for the second explosive charge. Veronica reached back into her briefcase and pulled out a second, much thicker bound dossier. She slid it across the table right on top of the prenuptial agreement. "That $45,000 brings us to our next critical point," she announced, her voice dropping to a dangerously serious register. "Your client did not just drain a joint emergency savings account to fund a romantic European getaway with his 24-year-old subordinate. He actually committed a severe and highly documented felony against his own flesh and blood." Bradley suddenly sat up straight, the color completely draining from his face. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "That was our money. We put it there for rainy days. I had every right to transfer it." "You really should learn to read the documents your wife puts in front of you, Bradley," Veronica admonished, shaking her head in mock pity. 3 weeks before the twins were born, Olivia transferred exactly $45,000 of her own private corporate dividends into what you assumed was a standard joint savings account. As the banking traces and legally binding trust documents in that folder clearly prove, that specific account was registered as an irrevocable educational and medical trust fund designated exclusively for Liam and Leo. Olivia was the primary trustee, Veronica explained methodically, outlining the trap Bradley had blindly walked right into. "You were listed merely as a secondary emergency signatory, restricted to withdrawing funds solely for the direct medical care or benefit of the infants. When you initiated that wire transfer routing, the money to an offshore account to buy luxury hotel suites and designer bags in Paris, you committed direct financial fraud and textbook embezzlement against 2 one-month-old infants. You completely destroyed your entire life and any chance of a future just to impress a young girl who abandoned you at the airport." The suffocating silence inside Chamber 4 was thick enough to choke on. Bradley stared at the table, his chest heaving as he desperately gasped for air, trying to process the absolute magnitude of his criminal exposure. The slick lawyer sitting beside him slowly closed his legal pad, his aggressive demeanor completely evaporating. He shifted his chair slightly away from his own client, realizing he was legally representing a man who had just admitted to felony embezzlement against his own infant children. Patricia and Richard sat paralyzed in the gallery, their smug arrogance entirely wiped away by the terrifying reality of impending prison sentences. Just when Bradley thought the absolute worst was over, the heavy oak door to the mediation chamber clicked open. Every head in the room turned as Keisha stepped over the threshold. She was not wearing her blue hospital scrubs today. She wore a razor-sharp tailored black blazer, her posture radiating absolute power and unbothered confidence. She walked past the gallery, completely ignoring the horrified gasps escaping Patricia and Richard. She approached our side of the table, standing tall and unwavering right beside me and Veronica. "What is the meaning of this?" The slick lawyer demanded, his voice cracking slightly as he desperately tried to regain control. This is a closed mediation. Only authorized parties are permitted inside. Veronica smiled, gesturing gracefully toward Keisha. This is my client, designated character witness, and a critical whistleblower regarding the ongoing conspiracy against her, she explained smoothly. Keisha has provided us with sworn affidavits and physical evidence that will permanently dismantle whatever defense you are currently trying to fabricate. Patricia leaped up from her chair, her face turning a deep mottled purple. Keisha, how dare you? She shrieked, her voice echoing off the paneled walls. You are a part of this family. You are married to Connor. How could you possibly betray us and side with this vindictive woman? Keisha turned to face my mother-in-law, her dark eyes flashing with absolute disgust. I am loyal to the truth, Patricia. Keisha stated, her voice dropping to a lethal calm tone. And after what I discovered on your son's discarded iPad, I would rather walk through fire than be associated with the sickening toxicity of your family tree. Connor agrees with me, by the way. We are done protecting your secrets. Keisha unclasped the sleek leather portfolio she was carrying and pulled out a thick stack of high-resolution printed screenshots. She placed them deliberately in the exact center of the oak table, sliding them toward the mediator and the opposing counsel. I thought you might want to read exactly how this family operates. Behind closed doors, she announced. The mediator picked up the first stack of papers, adjusting his glasses, Bradley's face contorted in sheer panic as he recognized the distinct interface of his own text messages printed in vivid color. Those are direct text message transcripts between Bradley and his mother. Keisha explained methodically, pacing the length of the table. Patricia did not just validate his infidelity. She actively coached him on how to execute a massive financial extortion campaign. If you look at the highlighted messages dated 3 days ago, you will see Patricia explicitly instructing Bradley to call Child Protective Services. She fed him the exact clinical terminology to use to falsely report Olivia for postpartum psychosis. Patricia literally typed out the words, "We will use the babies as leverage to force her to hand over half the corporate buyout." The slick lawyer dropped the pages back onto the table as if they were physically burning his hands. He rubbed his temples, closing his eyes in sheer professional agony. His clients had not just lied to him, they had documented a criminal conspiracy on a traceable network. But that is not the best part. Keisha continued, her voice ringing with triumphant finality. She pulled out a second stack of documents, dropping them heavily next to the first. These are emails extracted directly from Bradley's corporate account. They are from Madison, the 24-year-old subordinate he dragged to Paris. Bradley let out a pathetic whimpering sound, sinking lower into his leather chair. It turns out, Madison was not just a naive young girl, Keisha revealed, crossing her arms. When the international process server humiliated Bradley at the Chanel boutique and Madison realized he was completely broke, she did not just fly to Ibiza, she kept copies of every single corporate expense report Bradley had fraudulently manipulated to fund their domestic hotel rendezvous over the past 6 months. She is currently blackmailing him. These emails clearly show Madison threatening to expose his corporate expense fraud directly to his company human resources department unless he wires her $50,000 in hush money. Bradley is actively being extorted by his own mistress because he lied to her about his fake immense wealth. The room erupted into absolute chaotic pandemonium. The carefully constructed united front of the toxic in-law family completely and violently disintegrated in a matter of seconds. Richard spun around to face Patricia, his face twisted in raw, unfiltered fury. "You put our plans in writing," he roared at his wife. "Are you completely stupid? I told you to only speak to him over the phone. Now we are implicated in a federal extortion scheme because you could not stop texting your pathetic son." Patricia shrieked right back at her husband, slapping his arm. "Do not, you dare put this on me, Richard? You are the one who told him to demand half of the $80 million. You are the one who funded this predatory lawyer." Bradley jumped up from his chair, slamming his fists on the table. "You are both ruining my life," he screamed at his parents. "I should have never listened to you about calling the state authorities. Now I am going to lose my job because of Madison, and I am going to jail entirely." The mediator violently struck his wooden gavel against the oak table, effectively terminating the chaotic session. He declared the mediation a catastrophic failure and officially referred our case back to the presiding judge for an immediate and absolute ruling. There would be no private settlement, no negotiations, and absolutely no mercy. The slick lawyer practically sprinted out of the chamber, leaving his disgraced client completely alone. The in-laws were escorted out of the building by armed courthouse security guards, still screaming vicious insults at each other the entire way down the polished marble corridors. Keisha gave my shoulder a firm, proud squeeze before exiting the room, leaving me and Veronica to calmly pack up our flawless legal victory. We had completely decimated them and ensured that they would never be able to manipulate or threaten our peaceful lives ever again. 2 weeks later, we stood before a highly unsympathetic family court judge to receive the final ruling. Bradley stood at the defense table, looking like a hollowed-out shell of a man. He had been officially terminated from his corporate management position after the blackmail emails from Madison triggered a massive human resources investigation into his expense fraud. He was currently facing pending felony embezzlement charges from the district attorney, and he had been forced to move into a tiny rented room in a terrible neighborhood. The judge adjusted his robes and read the final absolute decree with zero hesitation. He formally stripped Bradley of every single marital asset, ruling that the prenuptial agreement was ironclad and completely enforceable. Bradley received absolutely 0% of my $80 million software acquisition. He was formally ordered to repay the stolen $45,000 trust fund in full, with an additional 10% penalty applied for intentional financial fraud. Furthermore, because of the active criminal investigation stemming from his malicious Child Protective Services report, the judge stripped him of all physical and legal custody of Liam and Leo. He was granted absolutely zero visitation rights until he completed a state-mandated psychological evaluation and a rigorous parenting class to ensure my sons were properly provided. For the judge slapped Bradley with the absolute maximum threshold for monthly child support because he was recently terminated for cause. The judge imputed his previous corporate salary, meaning the massive monthly payments would be aggressively garnished from whatever menial minimum wage job he could eventually secure. He walked into the courtroom hoping for $40 million, and he walked out carrying a lifetime of inescapable debt. I stepped out of the heavy double doors of the courthouse and walked out into the brilliant afternoon sunlight. The air felt incredibly crisp and clean. Chauffeured black SUV was waiting in the designated loading zone, the engine idling softly. Veronica walked beside me carrying her leather briefcase, looking incredibly satisfied with her absolute legal masterpiece. As I reached for the chrome door handle of the vehicle, a desperate voice called out from the bottom of the concrete steps. "Olivia, please wait." I turned around slowly, my expression completely blank. Bradley was practically stumbling down the courthouse steps, his wrinkled, cheap suit hanging loosely from his newly gaunt frame. He looked absolutely pathetic. Patricia was trailing closely behind him, her face red and streaked with furious, desperate tears, but Bradley ignored her, focusing entirely on me. He stopped a few feet away from the SUV, his chest heaving as he frantically tried to assemble his shattered pride. "Olivia, I am so sorry," he begged, his voice cracking as he looked into my eyes. "I made a massive mistake. I was just so overwhelmed and stressed out with the babies I panicked, but I went to Europe, and I thought about us the entire time. I really did. I found myself over there. Olivia, I realize that I do not want the bachelor life or the empty luxury. I just want my family back. I need you and the boys. Please, just give me one more chance to show you. I can be the man you need. We can figure this out together. I stood there on the pavement, looking at the man I had once promised to spend my entire life with. I searched my heart for even a single ounce of lingering affection or pity. But I found absolutely nothing. The space where my love for him used to reside was completely empty, replaced by a towering titanium fortress of self-respect and corporate success. I did not yell, I did not insult him, and I did not shed a single tear. I just looked at him with absolute zero emotion, my voice steady and ice cold. "You wanted space to find yourself, Bradley," I stated clearly, my words echoing in the quiet parking lot. "You abandoned your recovering wife and your newborn children to fly across the world because we were just too noisy and suffocating. Well, congratulations, you successfully found yourself. Now you have the rest of your life to search for whatever it is you are looking for, with absolutely nothing weighing you down." I turned my back on him and gracefully stepped into the luxurious leather interior of my chauffeured SUV. I closed the heavy door, sealing out the noise of the outside world. Through the tinted bulletproof glass, I watched Bradley fall to his knees on the hard concrete, clutching his head in absolute despair. Patricia stood over him, screaming frantically at the closed window of my vehicle, her face twisted in a mask of pure toxic rage. The driver smoothly shifted the vehicle into gear and pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the busy city traffic. I did not look back. A single time, I pulled out my phone and checked the live feed of the penthouse nursery. Liam and Leo were sleeping peacefully, their futures completely secure. I had successfully protected my empire, purged the toxicity from my life, and claimed my absolute freedom. Cut to black. The story of Olivia and Bradley serves as a powerful reminder that true strength often lies in quiet resilience rather than loud retaliation. When faced with ultimate betrayal and toxic gaslighting, Olivia did not waste her precious energy screaming, pleading, or trying to convince her abusers of her worth. Instead, the most profound lesson here is the importance of strategic preparation and unwavering independence. Toxic individuals thrive on emotional reactions. They desperately want you to feel helpless, isolated, and dependent. Bradley and his family fatally underestimated Olivia because they mistook her physical exhaustion for weakness and her silence for submission. However, she brilliantly used their blatant ignorance as her greatest shield. By focusing on objective facts, quietly securing her financial autonomy, and meticulously gathering undeniable evidence, she built an impenetrable fortress around herself and her children. This narrative beautifully illustrates that we are never obligated to accept the diminishing roles that manipulative people try to force upon us. You do not have to participate in their manufactured drama to win. Real empowerment comes from establishing ironclad boundaries and letting the severe consequences of people's own actions speak for themselves. Olivia's ultimate victory was not just about protecting her financial assets. It was about reclaiming her inner peace and refusing to compromise her self-respect for a partner who only viewed her as an object to exploit. Sometimes, the absolute best response to a devastating betrayal is to quietly pack up your energy, secure your own future, and walk away without ever looking back. Your worth is never defined by those who are simply too blind to see it. If you have ever had to quietly rebuild your life and stand up to those who underestimated you, share your story in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering reflections.